Megan Whelan is going to moderate the questions for us. So Megan, do you want to begin?
Absolutely. So as Dr. Timmons said, I'm Megan Whalen. I'm the Acting Associate Director for Communications in the Division of Marketing and Communications. We have 30 plus questions already submitted, and if you have an additional question, you can use the Q&A function that you see on the side of your screen. So please ask your questions. We do have so many that I'd like to ask the panelists to keep their answers brief. And if you are asking a question, please do not do so about your personal employment situation or questions that might infringe on someone else's privacy. Let's keep it respectful, informative, and a little bit fun. So moving on to our first question, it's for Dr. Abrahams. Now, he noted that the decision for winter semester will be made in the first half of the fall term, and a number of people did ask about that. But one related question from Joyce Killy Marino, she's wondering about the criteria for making the decision for winter semester and the process that will be used.
Sure. And so keeping it brief, three main criteria: health and safety, that's one, and that's obviously our top priority. Academic continuity, so whatever it is we decide to do at the beginning of the term will be robust to changing conditions within that term. And the last one will be lessons learned from the fall term. So this is brand new for all of us. We want to learn what worked, what did not work, and apply those lessons in what we do in the winter term. The process that we're going to use will be highly consultative. We're going to work with faculty, staff, and students and discuss with them their insights. We're also going to work with public health and safety, and that's going to inform a recommendation that we take forward.
Great. And many, as you mentioned, many faculty and staff have been working remotely since March, and we've received a few questions about remote work. Mr. Decker, Susan Curtis is wondering if there's been a time frame set for bringing staff back to campus. Unmute, please.
Sorry. No, there is no specific time frame. We continue to follow public guidance. All of our decisions are guided by the recommendations of the Medical Officer of Health, and we've involved the Medical Officer of Health in our meetings when we're discussing return to work, where the guidance is being respected, and we are following it. So at this point, the guidance still remains: if you can work from home, work from home. So that's our plan right now.
Okay. A professor in the Faculty of Science wants to know, when we do come back to campus, what's the university's plan to keep us safe when we'll be in a lecture hall that will be almost filled to capacity and physical distancing is not possible?
I don't anticipate we will be in a lecture hall, excuse me, a lecture hall filled almost to capacity. That's not the guidance right now. So again, we will follow the public health guidance for distancing, and it will determine how we move forward. So I'll go back to public health guidance.
Okay. President Timmons, the next question is for you. What do you anticipate will be the biggest challenge that you will face in this role as president? Have any unforeseen challenges or issues come up during your introductory meetings, through learning about the inner workings of the institution, or during your travel around the province?
Thank you, Megan. The most immediate challenge for me is meeting people and learning about Memorial University remotely. That has been a challenge. I am used to walking the halls, talking to people, finding out what's going on, and that has not been possible during a pandemic. What I see is one of our biggest challenges is something I hear in all of my consultations. It's budget. And my biggest worry is that we become paralyzed because of budget challenges. So I want to work with all of you to make sure that we can continue to move as a university, continue to advance, continue to bring in new programs, new ideas, even though we have budget challenges. That can't paralyze us. In terms of my trip around the province, what struck me was how Memorial is respected throughout this whole province, from the tip of Labrador to the south coast. For some of you, I encourage you to look at on Twitter my hashtag Tales from the Road MUN to see what people are saying about our university.
Great. We've heard from two different staff members who've seen their workloads increase substantially since March, and the typical peak and valley of their workload has turned into a steady state of busyness and responsibility. President Timmons, what would you say to employees in this situation, and what can the university do to help address this?
Well, first I want to say thank you. Thank you to all of the staff and faculty and student employees who have been working so hard. during the last few months. If you're finding that your workload is getting to be too much, please speak to your supervisor. Keep track of the things you're working on to make sure that you can communicate with your supervisor to look at what can be changed, what can be modified. Some people, I know things for me are taking longer than they might if I could just walk across the hall and chat with somebody. It takes more time to connect with them remotely and to bring a meeting together and to have those conversations. So I do know things are taking longer. It is a busy time. Take care of yourself, make sure you take wellness breaks, and if it's too much, please talk to your supervisor.
Mr. Decker, can you comment on the perception that some employees are working a lot while others are either working very little or not working at all, but still getting their full salaries?
Well, I think it's probably true that some people are working harder than others, and some people have greater demands. One of the examples I'll use there is our environmental health and safety people. We've conducted over 600 health and safety assessments for getting people back to work. So yeah, I think there are unequal demands right now. But I think that's to be expected in this situation. Given what's happened, I don't think you can sort of even out workload at this point in time. But I think in some ways the perception may be a bit more than the reality, particularly with people not doing anything. I think that's a pretty rare instance. I think the vast majority of our employees continue to be productive. Employees are being redeployed to other areas. I think a good example of this would be the people who work in our travel claims area, who've been redeployed to take care of issues that have been long-standing and need to be addressed. So they're working on that. And another person's been redeployed to another area. So a lot of this has been going on behind the scenes that a lot of people may not be aware of. In terms of people still getting their full salaries, I think in this time we need to be very supportive of our employees. I think employment stability is very important. I think that helps lessen the emotional burden on people. I know Dr. Timmons and the other VPs have been very supportive in that area.
And the next question is from a staff member in the Faculty of Medicine who'd like to know some of the tangible positive examples of ways that COVID-19 and the ever-shifting new normal has impacted Memorial employees working from home and on campus. Dr. Timmons, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can. You know, when I'm traveling the province and going to Grenfell and Labrador in particular, what I heard is that for some of our faculty and staff, this has been an opportunity to feel like they have an equal voice because everything's done remotely. I know Jeff, who's here from Grenfell, he often has to come into meetings remotely for the St. John's campus, and now everybody has. So that's been kind of an equalizer that we didn't anticipate. I've heard from some of our professors how they've gotten hooked on to online learning, learned a lot of different pedagogies that they will continue to utilize throughout their teaching. So that's been a very positive tangible outcome. I also need to mention something that Mark Abrahams mentioned is one of the things we have seen in the pandemic is the effect on some of our faculty and staff, such as women with children and men with children at home, young children. I just received today MUN's document, the take on that they said the need for collective equity-based response to the pandemic, and I want to congratulate MUNFA on a very well thought out response to faculty and staff. This is not a positive. This is a negative that we have seen the pandemic impact on our, on people in different ways. In particular, as Mark said, some of our more marginalized communities and women. And I'm on a national task force trying to look at ways that we can make sure that we don't go back a decade in terms of the economic impact on our women in our country. So I will say there have been positives, but we're also well aware of the challenges.
Next question is also for Dr. Timmons. Dr. Susan Ziegler is interested to learn more about your thoughts and plans for reconnecting and engaging faculty and staff in shaping the future and operations of Memorial University. Can you talk a bit more about that? Well,
we've launched the strategic planning process, and I'm really excited about this. This is a way for us to learn about people's aspirations for Memorial University. and also to see what we can do differently, what we can do better for the next 5 years. So I'm encouraging everyone to get engaged in the strategic planning process, and that's how I'm going to learn about what and engage with faculty and staff. I'll be joining many of you on some of the virtual consultations. So please get involved and get engaged as we move forward with strategic planning.
Great. And the next question touches a little bit on what Dr. Timmons was talking about, the impact of COVID-19 and the disruption that that's had for families. And this question comes from 2 academic staff members in the School of Music. The global pandemic has caused major disruptions to research and public engagement, teaching, service work, and personal life for members of the university community. Many academic staff members have experienced significant delays in their research programs, increased service, and additional work pressures associated with remote instruction while managing full-time child and elder care responsibilities. This has significant repercussions for promotion and tenure, and many ASMs are also facing increased costs associated with childcare in order to do their jobs. What is the university administration doing with regard to guidelines for promotion and tenure committees, union heads, and ASMs applying for tenure? And secondly, what can the university do to mitigate the pressures of increased workload and lack of childcare? Dr. Abrahams.
So maybe I'll start with the second part of the question first, and really just repeat what Dr. Timmons said. If you're suffering from increased pressure associated with workload, please let us know. We have tried to put supports in place through CITL and additional supports for graduate students to assist with remote teaching. But if you're still being challenged, if you're not able to get access to the resources that are being put in place, please let your department head or dean know so that we can adjust and modify our response. With respect to childcare, I don't have an answer for you yet, but we're taking a look to see if space available on campus might be able to be part of the solution to address that situation. With respect to promotion and tenure, I spoke to that in my opening remarks, and those in the Faculty of Science have heard me go on about this at some considerable length because I had this discussion with all new faculty. We have a somewhat unique process for promotion and tenure, which you do not see at most other Canadian universities, in that it's an ongoing dialogue through our non-decision year process. So as I tell all faculty, if you're unlikely to get tenure, you probably know that many years in advance. It's not based upon a cumulative amount of material which is produced. Likewise, and in the vast majority of cases, if you've been doing a really good job, we'll let you know that. We'll provide you with constructive feedback. And if we have an aberrant event, such as a pandemic, it is not our intention to use that against you with respect to your promotion and tenure file. We are aware of that. The point being that our process is very much a dialogue. It's not a question of simply meeting expectations, which are then determined at some later point in time.
Thank you. This is another question for Dr. Abrahams. We've heard from staff members in the Blunden Center, and this is what they had to say. As we move into the fall semester and the continued shift to remote learning, it is important to recognize that while many students will experience challenges in the remote environment, students with disabilities are far more likely to be impacted. Can you please highlight what measures have been put in place to ensure staff and faculty create an accessible remote learning experience for students?
Sure, and so I would refer those individuals to our Associate Vice President Academic Students. We have been working very hard to make sure it's not just the courses which are being made available remotely to our students, but also the services to our students. So our counseling center is being made available remotely to students, as well as other supports for those students. So if you can't find them online, please contact Dr. Donna Hardy-Cox for the details.
Mr. Decker, the next question is for you. Campus enforcement recently advised that employees requiring parking on campus must renew their permit. There are those of us who are working from home and incurring the costs that go along with that, but also need to come onto campus occasionally for meetings and assignments with other employees. Can we apply for visitor parking if we're just on campus occasionally to avoid us needing to incur the extra cost of permit renewal until such time as we're on campus regularly and full time?
The simple answer is yes, that if you go online, you can apply for a temporary permit. I think there's 3 hours notice, if I'm not mistaken, to get one, but the answer is yes.
Great. President Timmons, next question for you. It's no secret that the province is in rough financial shape right now. As the province's only university, and based on the fact that our mandate is to serve the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, what responsibility or role do you think that we play in getting the province back on track? You're muted, Dr. Timmons.
Shoot, we have a huge responsibility. I keep saying this to government officials. Memorial University is one of your biggest economic drivers in this province, and we need to recognize that. We're not an expenditure for government, we're an investment for government. And so I have to keep getting that message out. We've also put together for government all of our revenue savings, all of our expenses, and we're trying to really educate them on the impact on COVID on the university community and on the budget itself. So that message, and I encourage everyone to get that message out to your neighbors. You hire a faculty member who brings in research money, who brings in graduate students, who then brings in postdocs. Like, it is, if it was a company that you invested in that brought all of these employees and students from all over the world, and then also had the benefit of educating leaders for the province, you would see it as a very significant investment. That's the message that I'm working on getting out.
Next question is for Dr. Abrahams. When and how can we hire postdocs from outside of Canada? For example, I have postdocs waiting in France and the United States who are supposed to start in April or May, and they're willing to self-isolate upon arrival, etc. Can you comment on that?
So right now that's governed by federal policy and an order in council. So that policy was supposed to be lifted on July 31st, but it was extended through to August 31st. Universities Canada is working with the federal government on seeking an exception, but at this point in time, we do not have one.
Okay. And another question for Dr. Abrahams. Where is the best place, person, or department to send students who may require financial or non-financial assistance this semester?
Once again, my go-to answer is Dr. Donna Hardy-Cox, our Associate Vice President of Academic Students.
Great. Mr. Blackwood, this question is for you. The Marine Institute is heavily involved in training. Most of this is regulatory and mandatory for the fishing, marine transportation, aquaculture, and oil and gas sectors. It is hands-on and practical, and it is an essential service. It is offered at our campus in St. John's, across the island, and throughout Labrador. What advice can you give us when responding to clients currently seeking this regulatory training?
Thank you, Megan. And for those who were wondering if I smile, it's the beard that hides it. I had a couple of faculty members email me online and say you should be smiling. So on this question, it's a big issue because we train 6,000 people a year in over 80 communities. And we do that in Foxtrap, our facilities in Stephenville, Lewisport, Holyrood, but also in community centers, college and North Atlantic campuses. So we're working out how we can do that under the provincial health guidelines and fully anticipate. It's not a matter of how we get it done. We have to get it done. It's essential services essentially for the province. And it involves everything from fuel delivery to northern communities and regulatory requirements that are needed to make that happen. And we've got to get this training done as we've done for many years, both from an engagement of our faculty and from the response to industry, and essentially an essential service for the province from the oil and gas sector, the aquaculture sector. Without this training, many of these industries will have to shut down or curtail activities.
My next question is about the shortage of laptops and computers for both post-secondary students and younger students. We have a staff member who's wondering if there might be an opportunity to recycle old laptops and computers in Memorial's inventory to give to our students and others in need, and also potentially provide employment opportunities for students in preparing computers for that purpose. Mr. Decker, can you comment on that?
Well, actually, I think that's a great suggestion. And what I'll do is I'll make a note of that and talk to our IT people, find out what we've got. But yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Next question is related to labs. Will labs still be conducted in courses such as chemistry, Dr. Abrahams?
The only exception I'm aware of will be honors thesis students or graduate students who are doing laboratories with the Faculty of Science, who's moved all undergraduate courses and the lab equivalents to remote learning for the fall term.
Okay. So for those of us with young children in the K-12 system, will there be any grace afforded to us caretakers in the event that the children in our lives are forced into a school from home or self-isolation period at home during remote working? Mr. Decker, are you able to comment on that? And can you unmute, please?
Sorry, I really have a problem with that. I think right now we're trying to be as flexible as we can in these situations. Obviously, it's an unusual time. We'll want to work with people to, I guess, ensure we get our work done, but also to ensure that other responsibilities are maintained as well.
Next question is for Dr. Abrahams. In your response regarding winter semester that we will use lessons learned from the fall session, we have completed a full spring session remotely already. Is there a feedback process for faculty to provide you those lessons learned already?
Well, that would be part of the consultation process that we're planning on using. So that would be the venue that we would seek, having conversations with faculty.
And next question, we have quite a few CUPE members who have been redeployed. How is this determined, and should we expect more staff to be redeployed in the near future? That's a question for Mr. Decker.
One of the things we've been trying to do, obviously, is to ensure everybody is productive. And to this point, what we found is that our employees and our unions in particular have been very cooperative. Everybody recognizes that we're in a tough place. There's a lot of work that needs to get done. And if there are people available who can do the work, it's actually been working fairly well. So we will continue where possible and where we're able to do that. In terms of how long that goes on, I guess it'll be determined by the length of the pandemic. But I do want to thank our unions and our employees for being flexible in the situation. It's been very important to us.
Okay, next question is for Dr. Timmons. I'm wondering how Memorial is supporting the provincial and community needs related to COVID-19 and our recovery. Are we actively engaging the community?
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for that question. We're working with the government. We have set up a special committee to work with the government on economic recovery and anything. So if the government needs help on digital retail, that committee then looks at that and does some matching. We did a lot of work on protective equipment, as you know, during the pandemic with testing of masks and gowns for the community and for government. As I'm out there listening to community needs, the biggest need I'm hearing from outside of St. John's is reliable internet access. And we can see even today on this town hall, I want to thank everyone for their patience and logging on. But for many communities, like in Mary's Harbor, on the Labrador coast, there's not even cell phone service. So that's an area which working with our community and government to see we have to provide better access for students throughout the province. And I know that they're very interested in working with us on that. So there are many, many areas. I also want to acknowledge the Marine Institute. I'll give you an example. I met with the Woodward Company, whose mariners need to get upgrading to get back on out to sea and on the ferries. And the Marine Institute is the key to doing that and working very closely with them and how they can get that training done. So we are helping so much the economy. One more last one, when I met with some mining community, they talked about how our engineering and computer science departments had helped them be able to get instruments to do better mining in their gold mining, which had a huge economic impact. So we are working a lot with our community in lots of different ways, and it's been wonderful.
Great. And just before I move on to the next question, I do want to apologize for some of the technical difficulties that folks had when they were trying to log on to the session. I have seen a few questions from folks who are having difficulties with audio at the beginning and wondering if this will be available after the fact. This town hall is being recorded. It is our first one, and we're still working out some of the technological kinks. But we will be sharing it a link to this after the fact and sharing more information in the Gazette. And of course, any questions that don't get answered that have been submitted, we'll be looking for those answers and sharing those broadly as well. So on to the next question. It's for Mr. Decker. It seems that our office occupancy limits are much lower than in other public institutions, such as provincial government departments and the health and legal systems, as well as the private sector. How are these limits set?
We are basically guided by the public health guidance. So we've been essentially relying on that guidance, doing our measurements, being very careful. And maybe we are in some cases erring a little on the side of caution and safety, but we are doing our best to ensure that the community is safe. That's our primary goal.
Next question is also for Mr. Decker. Some folks have questions regarding employees having to use their own resources at home. Can items being used be reimbursed, such as paper, printers, internet, etc.?
The direct supplies used for work, yes, obviously they can be reimbursed. We're also working with some of our groups around CRA, I guess, changes in terms of expenses for home offices. Some people may be familiar with that, some may not, but I expect there's going to be a change in the CRA guidance for this year that allows employees to essentially have the assumption made that you're required to work from home and required to have an office, so we can provide the proper tax forms for that purpose. So yes, direct supplies, absolutely. And there's actually a process arranged through Staples to have things delivered directly to your house. That's there. We can contact our purchasing people if you have questions around that. But yeah, direct supplies, yes, obviously. We don't expect people to buy paper or printers themselves, those kinds of things.
Okay. Next question is for President Timmons. Do you have any advice for new employees in how to work within the university setting during this pandemic? How can we ensure that new employees feel valued, welcomed, and productive while working from afar? And do you have any advice for them?
I'd like advice for me because I'm one of those new employees that are trying to work remotely and get to know people. So I think it's really important to work with your department, get to know people, step up if there's opportunities to volunteer for committees, so you're not so disconnected from the university. Reach out, volunteer, put your hand up, especially more now that we're remote than ever, because I think it could be really easy to be insular when really part of a new job is getting to know people, seeing new opportunities, and that's really, really important. I'd like advice from you for me. So if any of you have advice for me, I'll take it. I will, because as a new employee, this has really been tough at times.
As compared to other provinces, Newfoundland is COVID-free for all practical purposes. What are possible ways to use this advantage for teaching and research at Memorial? And I'll ask Dr. Abraham to chime in on that one.
Again, we follow our guidance from public health and safety. So you're absolutely correct. I think the risk of community transmission of COVID-19 is relatively low. But I think the lesson learned from what we've seen in other locations around Canada is you cannot get complacent. So we remain vigilant and continue to do so even with our relatively low infection rate.
If I could just, sorry, Meg, if I could just add to that, I think the assumption we've been making in our administrative group is that we'll know when COVID is back 2 weeks after it's back. There's the issue. So we do have to be cautious.
Absolutely. Next question relates to student enrollment. Dr. Timmons, are you able to tell us what the total student enrollment for the autumn term is? And perhaps Dr. Abrams, if you could then answer if there are any on-campus classes being held.
I can say that we're up 3% overall, but we're anticipating a drop because a number of our international students have registered, but may not be able to get their study permits. So this is a very fluid number. I'm pleased at that we are up 3% as of today, or just over 3%, but we're monitoring this very, very carefully.
And I'm sorry I didn't get that question in advance, otherwise I would have put the list together, but from memory, the on-campus courses are Term 6 Engineering, Faculty of Science honors thesis students that need access to laboratories. There's 2 classes in Human Kinetics and Recreation, and I'm sure there's some others that I've forgotten, but it's still a very small fraction of what we normally do.
Next question. I'm a laboratory instructor in the Department of Physics, and I'm wondering if there is any faculty-wide communications hub for lab staff to share information about running remote laboratories in the fall. Dr. Abrahams, a crack at that one?
I would reach out to Dr. Travis Fridgen, who is the Dean of Science. I know Travis has been extremely proactive, and so I'm sure that answer resides within the Faculty of Science.
And this is a little bit of a similar question coming from Chelsea Walsh in the School of Music. Faculty and staff have been leaning on each other and benefiting from idea trading when planning for the fall. Has there been any discussion about digital support groups or perhaps a forum that would allow for cross-campus conversation? Dr. Timmons, are you able to answer that question?
Do you know, the neat thing about this town hall is we're having great suggestions, not just questions. So I'm going to take that and have a conversation at the VP level about that, because I think that's a fabulous suggestion. And there may be conversations like that happening. I am just may not be aware of them.
And if I could chime in, I know that conversation is taking place within the Faculty of Science, but I think a much wider community conversation would be very helpful. It's a great suggestion.
This is a follow-up on the laptop conversation we had a little while ago. Mr. Decker, is there a way of collecting laptops not owned by the university to add to the stock of used computers if that is something that we're going to do?
Again, sounds like a great suggestion. I'll talk to our IT people and see what we can do in terms of setting up a place for drop-off. I do know we have a drop-off place right now. You can bring your laptops if you have problems with them. So perhaps that could be a function added there, and maybe we can do some communications around that. I expect there are a number of people out there in the community with older desktops, laptops, maybe tablets that could be quite useful for students in particular. So yeah, I think that's a great suggestion.
The next question relates to final exams for Dr. Abrahams. Are there any plans to have virtual invigilation in place?
Our process is to try to stay away from invigilated exams wherever possible, simply because the environment for doing so is very difficult. But for those circumstances where an invigilated final exam is unavoidable, we are providing some funding through ProctorU. But faculty have to be aware that students do require certain hardware and bandwidth requirements to make that happen. So even if you are going down that path, you need a contingency plan for some other solution.
In terms of, we had a question a little while ago about employees using their own resources for things like paper, printers, and so on. Has there been any thought to how laptops fit into this? There are many staff who are without and are using their own computer resources. How should they proceed? Mr. Decker.
I think in that situation, you should talk to your supervisor and talk through the issue and see what might be able to be done there.
Okay, my screen just hopped all the way up, so I'm losing the next list of questions. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so because we are online, do international students still need their study permits to begin studies since they will not actually be entering the province to study? Dr. Abrahams, can you answer that question?
The answer is no.
And a follow-up question about international students. Are we encouraging them to come to Newfoundland? How is the province involved? And if so, how are we managing their arrival?
So for international students, so they would get a letter of offer mailed to them. They would receive a student visa once they physically enter Canada. And for self-isolation, we are using space within our residences to provide students with a 14-day self-isolation period. And we're doing so at a considerably reduced cost.
Mr. Decker, in terms of following public health guidelines and your group, can you talk about who is a part of that group? Is there any doctors or scientists involved in those decision-making processes?
We've got I guess, a fairly extensive group consisting of people represented by our academic portfolio, research portfolio, chief risk officer, HR, finance, basically all the admin people plus others. The person we're relying on most heavily and who's actually devoted a significant amount of time to us is Dr. Kathy Donovan, who's the Medical Officer of Health for the Eastern Region. And I believe who happens to be an employee of the university, so we're sort of fortunate there. So she's been devoting a significant amount of time to us and providing us with advice and I guess guidance. We also communicate, of course, with our academic decision-making groups as well. So we do have a fairly significant group there. In terms of our distancing, we've got a person who works in the Faculty of Science Geography who's providing some fairly extensive work for us in terms of spaces and the amount of space required to accommodate people. It's actually quite interesting. And at some point, it's probably a good idea for us to get that online. So yeah, there's been a fair amount of work there. It's fairly extensive, and it is, I guess, in some ways objective as opposed to just subjective.
Megan, if I could just jump in ever so briefly with respect to the requirements for international students coming into the province. It was pointed out to me that students really should contact our internationalization office for visa and isolation guidance. So Dr. Sonia Knutson is really the very important contact person for those students.
Great, thank you. Public libraries are opening across the province. What is the latest development on the safe opening of libraries on campus so that students can escape the havocs of home life? Dr. Timmons, would you like to answer that question?
The libraries are working on providing study space for students and respecting the safety guidelines. And I'm going to be encouraging the deans in all the different departments to look at potential study space that can be provided for students on campus so that they can come in. That has been identified as a real need for our students. So we'll be hearing more and get updates on the library. Our provost is working on that with the libraries. But everyone, look around your departments and your space, and if there is study space, please work with our facilities people to see if some students could access that. Always look, keeping in mind safety. Mark, do you want to speak on the libraries?
Sure. So we're actually working with the libraries at our last Vice President's Council. We did in fact approve that. So we are now implementing providing study space to students. It will be done on an appointment basis rather than a drop-in basis, but stay tuned for details.
As a follow-up to the question from the physics lab instructor about collaborating with other departments' lab instructors, there is a lab instruction bright space group that we can communicate through. So that might be something that lab instructors might want to follow up on after this meeting. Next question is related to tech resources. Will WebEx be made available to all instructors for teaching synchronously? If not, can instructors be reimbursed for Zoom licenses? Mr. Decker, can you answer that question?
Yes, we've obtained I guess what you call a site license for WebEx. So WebEx is widely available. I would encourage anybody with an issue around that to contact our IT people. Steve Green is our CIO, so please contact Steve. But yes, WebEx is widely available. And we've actually been implementing various, I guess, components of it, not just the meeting component. One of the things you see here today is one of the extra pieces we've added in. So yeah, there's lots of capacity in that system. So please contact Steve Green.
Okay, the next question. Several researchers of the Folklore and Language Archive have inquired about the possibility of accessing materials in person. While the QE2 is offering limited support for researchers, how might MUNFLA? Mr. Decker, can you answer that? Access to on-campus materials?
I think the thing you need to do there is contact our environmental health and safety people. And many of you may know our Badcock, our Director of Environmental Health and Safety, and we'll have an assessment done and I guess decide and provide advice on an appropriate way to do that.
Okay, thank you. Evidence from other universities is that COVID responses work best when all key players are represented at the table. We are no longer in an emergency. Will MUN start including union representatives on key decision-making bodies redeveloping protocols? I'll direct that question first to Dr. Abrahams.
Well, we've moved out of emergency mode anyway, so we are now following all of our normal protocols. I would say we are now in a normal decision-making process as we have been in the past.
Okay. So we're down to just 4 minutes until the end of this session. So if you have any last questions, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more. One person is asking, when will the large meeting rooms be open? Mr. Decker, do you want to chime in on that?
Again, it goes back to public health guidance and when it's safe to do so.
Megan, I saw a question on when will the strategic planning consultations begin. I just want to give a little update on that, if I may. So we have a facility, we had a call out for people to come in and be part of a facilitation team. We had over 100 people volunteer. It's going to be around 15 people. That team now is getting set up, and we'll be looking at September, getting notice and information going out around consultations. So again, encourage everyone to get engaged.
Okay, folks, and if you've submitted a question that was over the character limit, I'm not sure that it came through to my screen. So I've seen some folks who have tried to add an addendum to a question, but I've only seen the addendum and not the first half. So if you did run into that error, if you could try quickly retyping it, that would be wonderful. So the Blunden Center team had several specific questions in addition to the general question. Will there be an opportunity to address those? So in the interest of getting through as many questions as possible, I just chose the high level question and not the specific ones underneath it. But we can certainly look into finding those answers and sharing those more broadly after the end of the session. Having trouble scrolling down. Okay. So some of us are discovering that we're much more motivated and productive working from home. Do you think remote working might be a more widely accepted option even after the pandemic is behind us? Dr. Timmons?
We're definitely going to be looking at that. I think many organizations are doing that assessment as we go forward. Some people do find that they're more productive at home, and that will have to be worked out with their supervisors as we look at bringing people back, looking at different options. I hope it will, that what we have learned during that pandemic is a more flexible learning opportunities for our staff and faculty, and that for some people, this is a very positive thing.
Yeah, if I could just, again, circle back to that discussion earlier around the remote work policy and the consultation on that. Please, I encourage everybody to take part in that consultation. We need all the, I guess, the advice, the comments, and the ideas that people have. So please take part in that. You'll see that coming up in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks.
So Megan, I see our time is pretty well up. So I just want, we've had unexpectedly over 1,000 people try to come on. Some people could not get on because we ended up, we didn't plan for that many. I don't think we thought we would get a good turnout, but definitely not the turnout we got. What I'm really interested in is if you found this beneficial, and if it is, then we will try to do this again as we go through on the term and get questions answered. I want to thank everybody who gave us the questions ahead of time. That helped us, you know, being able to deal with multiple questions in our opening remarks. I really know this is going to be tough this term for our faculty, staff, and students, but together with empathy and understanding, and also remembering that we have to keep moving forward as an institution, we can get through this, and we need to do what some of you have said. We need to get the best learning we can out of it, and we need to then look at what possible options after the pandemic we can put in place to support our faculty, staff, and students. So on behalf of the vice presidents and myself, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll look forward to hearing from you whether or not you found this beneficial. Thank you, everyone. Look to the Gazette article that will be also doing a summary of the questions and answers that you put forward. Take care, everybody. Be safe and stay positive. Thank you.